This is the Open Global Mind weekly call for Thursday, July 24th, 2025. Still can't quite get used to talking about 2025. It seems weird to be in the next, the quarter through the century somehow. I don't know, time flies, especially when you're having fun talking about topics like grief. Madison Square Park. Thank you, Gil. That's exactly right. Appreciate that cue. And so, dearly beloved, we are gathered here to mourning, I don't know, to talk about grief and its role, its many different roles in our world. I don't want to constrain the topic in any way. I just want to see how you think it connects in to where our conversations have been, what you care about at this moment in the world, whatever else it might be, wherever it takes us. Let's see where the topic sort of drifts us. But whoever would like to take us in, please start. Grief is on the table. One order of grief, side of tater tots.
Well, see, there's an example of how humans often deal with grief.
Thank you.
Which is by not dealing with grief.
Or just by sidestepping it and softening the entrance with humor, perhaps. I mean, I don't know that that's avoidance behavior. I think it's softening the entrance, maybe.
That's funny. You focused on the humor part. I focused on the eating part.
Do you have grief about food?
No, but some people, myself included, eat to fill that painful part.
Yep, exactly. Let me just float a serious thought into the conversation, which is, I think there's a whole mess of unprocessed grief in our societies, individual and collective, that individually, many of us, myself included, have not grieved properly many things that are grief worthy in our lives. And collectively, we've gone through many things that we don't address and grieve. Eric.
Yeah, thanks. I was listening to an audio book of Elizabeth Kubler-Ross on death and dying. And I guess the timing of this is anticipating the demise of my parents, which the 93 and 94 could happen anytime. And just trying to understand the research, the phases of grief, and so it's the book is done very well. It's comforting, it's perspectives, and I think that's been a model for many years that people have used. The denial, the anger, bargaining, whatever the stages are. So, but when I first found out that my mom was no longer going to have treatment for her cancer, that not knowing when she might pass, and miraculously she's still here with us, but the quality of life is very much degraded. So the way I responded was I started like collecting things together, and I made like a poster of pictures of her life. So like that's a way that I found to like deal with the news. And I don't know how it's going to hit me when it actually happens. But I think we need to all be aware of the the quality of life that people have in their 90s these days. And like there are limits, and we could all find ourselves becoming caretakers at short notice. So I think that's where I'll leave it for now.
Thanks, Eric. And little question, by the quality of life in the 90s, do you mean that it's actually improved a lot over what our quality of life would have been in the 90s a while ago, or that it's still not good and we're keeping people alive with a terrible quality of life longer than we should?
What I'm seeing is the yes, we have facilities, but we really have to consider the human being inside, where they are, because if they're struggling every day and they can't find that spark that keeps them going, and it's really complicated to express.
Thanks, Eric. You're reminding me that one of my dojo mates, I do Aikido as my sport. One of my dojo mates is an end-of-life oncologist, and he in Oregon is part of the official decision making about when people get, end-of-life care or euthanasia or things like that. And having conversations with him is delightful and very awakening. It's you're like, whoa, okay, these are the things that he faces daily with the patients that he's talking to, and it's quite extraordinary. Alex.
Yeah, tough times. Two things. I was going to get at what you were going to say, said earlier, Jerry, but before, just for Eric, when my parents passed, I was one of those very lucky people who never experienced grief of that nature till my parents passed, and they passed very quickly within a few months of each other. Now, the thing that got me. The thing that got me when that
Hi,
happened.
Sam.
The thing that got me when that happened was, for the first time in my life, I realized, and I was in my 50s, late 50s, there's no undo button. I cannot undo that. I cannot do anything. I'd always been able to do something. I can do research, I can do this, that, whatever. The first time it hit me that I cannot press escape and restore. And that really, really hit me hard. And anyway, but on what Jerry, you were saying, I thought was very prescient, or not prescient, very interesting, is that with the way life has evolved, and you said, oh, we haven't processed grief individually and whatever. There's so many routes to escape from facing or dealing with grief that we sort of compartmentalize it somewhere, and we never really, or not for a long time, we don't deal with it until eventually we have to deal with it. But you're absolutely right. It's sort of the world, is, even if something major happens grief-wise, hits the papers, hits everything, but the mere fact of the news insulates someone from dealing with the grief. It's just a function of life, yet another algorithm that affects our lives. It's very strange. And I do believe lots of people, lots of grief walking around, and they don't really realize how much it affects their life and decisions and everything.
Grace Rahmani, who used to hang out here with us, posted a comment on a thing I did on LinkedIn, and she mentioned that she was observing the Jewish ritual of saying a prayer for the past for a year after her father's death, and that some of her friends and family were thinking it was like weird. And she was like, there's ancient rituals and wisdom that are there for probably a good reason that she can't explain, I can't explain, but she was honoring it as a way to process the grief, I guess. And I may be overinterpreting even by saying that. But it was really notable that many of the settings, places, and rituals that we used to engage in. We used to rent our clothes and cover all, in Judaism also you cover the mirrors in the house, etc. But there are things that we, in many cases, no longer do. In many communities, people used to wear black for a long time as a sign of mourning, or a black armband at work, or whatever else. I don't ever see anybody wearing a black armband at work. And I think if we did, we would think, oh my God, they've joined some kind of weird religious movement. We wouldn't know how to identify it. It's kind of crazy. Oh, we've got multi cameras on Sam. I like this. Gil, please.
So a few things, Jerry. Oh God, where's my camera? Where's my camera not working?
It's right in front of you, but it's not showing us you.
I know, I see that. It's showing me my background.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh, I see. It's flipped what kind of camera it wants to use. There we go.
There you go.
So I think you'll find that in tighter, more coherent communities, you might see those external signs, not in the more cosmopolitan communities that we live in now. And so the reinforcement of ritual in community is more diffuse, dissipated, diluted in the large crowd. If you go to the ones I'm familiar with is the Orthodox Jewish communities in Brooklyn and in Muncie and so forth, where you will see those things.
Mhm.
Um, um, the Jewish ritual on this I find very meaningful. There's a phasing over time of 7 days and 30 days and 11 months, not a year, but 11 months,
Thank you.
where the intensity or the rigor of the ritual gradually diminishes over time. Um, the first 7 days, people won't work, won't listen to music. Mirrors are covered. I mean, this is for people who are practicing fully. Not everyone does this. Covering of mirrors, sitting on the floor, not on chairs. Um, it's called sitting Shiva, sitting for 7 days. People come to the home of the mourners and bring food, not expecting to be served or entertained, but bring things. Not ask the mourner questions of how you're doing, just letting the mourners initiate conversation, if so being, not cutting hair or beards. The next 30 days, it softens up some. Eric, help me out here. I think there's still no music being listened to. Um, and then gradually you return to life, and gradually it settles down. But there's a mourner's prayer said every day for those 11 months, and then annually on the anniversary of the death. So there's a combination of an intensity and a gradual return to so-called normal life. And I trust that other cultures have that as well. It was just Jane and I were just at the wake on Monday for Joanna Macy, who died on Saturday at 96. And I want to say something about 90s in a moment. And it was a different ritual. In this case, there was Joanna lived in a Buddhist tradition. There was a person who welcomed folks at the door to the home with like a very connected welcome and an explanation of what the process was going to be. In the home, there was a room of singing and talking, and there was a room of silent meditation, which you could go to either one as you chose. And if you wanted to, could go into her bedroom. And there she was at this point, 2 days dead, in her bed, covered by a blanket and buried in rose petals. And there were two bowls of rose petals at the foot of the bed, and you sort of figured out that you were invited, if you wanted to take some rose petals and sprinkle them on the shape of her body under the blanket. Um, Rigor mortis had already set in, of course, 2 days later. And it was beautiful and graceful and deeply moving. And grief of different flavors throughout the passage through this. Then we went outside and down the stairs, and there were people in the garden talking and posting Post-its of remembrance because she loved Post-its. And so, we were there for, I don't know, about an hour and a half, and we're taken through various flavors of grief and joy and appreciation, kind of both all together. Clear physical loss and clear sense of her presence and her gifts. So that's another way. Sam, could you mute, please?
Yeah, I'm trying.
Thanks. And so very different approach. And I know other cultures have other approaches. For me, grief isn't easily accessible. It sort of comes on when it does. For me, it's rarely bawling, which I know it is for some people. For Jane, it's more like that. For me, it's just sort of a softening and water flows out of orifices on my face. sometimes gentle and often very much delayed from the event. I just want to say something about people in their 90s. So Joanna passed at 96. I have other friends who've recently passed in the early 90s. Had a friend last year, year before, who died at 102.
Wow.
Holocaust survivor, very active, vigorous, intellectually acute, physically acute. I mean, he was 98. He would be the guy who would lift chairs and carry them over his head across the room to provide seating for people. He's like unstoppable, man. And so I guess what I want to say about the 90s is that people are different, and individual capacity to live well and to experience living well and to like the being alive rather than being done varies by people. When my father passed, for the last 6 months, he was in and out of hospitals and kidney dialysis and so forth. And his doctors pretty much told him, "You're not going to get better. We can hold you at this level. You're not going to get better." He couldn't hear that. He kept thinking he was going to get better. And there came one night, my sister and I were visiting him in the nursing home, and he took both of our hands and he said, "I'm done." And the next morning he was done. He was gone the next morning.
Well,
So there was, his physical capacity was diminished. His mental capacity was not. His spark and his will was strong throughout this whole ordeal until he decided one day, enough. So, point of story. I don't want to look at numbers and statistics on the decision on the readiness for the end of life.
mhm.
So, thanks for hearing me.
Thanks, Gil. You reminded me, my dad weaned me on several pieces of classical music, one of which was the Mikado, and one of my cheats for getting into a sad place is to listen to some of the music from the Mikado or to watch the movie Topsy Turvy, which is a majestic movie by Mike Leigh about the making of the Mikado by Gilbert and Sullivan. And I go into some deep place of bittersweetness that where grief is right there. No, no problem at all. But otherwise, it's hard. Otherwise, it's really difficult. Sam.
Thanks. Let me just shut this off 1 second. Got an echo here. I really wanted to join this meeting about grief because it's been so present for me, really like strangely present for me in the last weeks. And we're planning a trip to Prince Edward Island where I grew up, the old hippies community that, I don't know how much I've talked about, but a lot of the old hippies are dying. And so I think there's a lot of grief there for them and for me as well. And our dad is coming with us. This may be the last time he gets to go back there. So has a lot of, sorry, I'm going to tear up here in a minute, but anyway, I listened to this song, James Taylor song, You Can Close Your Eyes. It's like a lullaby, but it's really about death. And just been crying a lot about it. And so I just, decided I wanted to write a song that was sort of like that, but that tied in the community, the culture of the community that I grew up in somehow. And so, James Taylor definitely ties into that culture. But so I wrote some lyrics with the help of ChatGPT, and my brother has an account with Suno, which is like our AI music generation software. So I posted a link there if you want to see it. And anyway, I don't know what else to say. It's just sometimes it's hard to accept the transitions. The transitions are difficult, and for kids, the transition, to sleep, and for the elderly, and for anyone really, the end of life is tough. So, and so the lullaby is not just for kids. Sorry.
Thank you, Sam. Thank you very much.
If you want to hear music related to death, I have a video of with some music we sang when my mom passed away. And not to add more sadness or weird vibes to anybody, but I'll just post it. And my brothers and I sang a little eulogy. You see her there, rigor mortis all set in. If anybody's, really wants to go there, you're welcome to. But anyway, anyway, that's all I have to say.
Thank you, Sam. Carl, you lost your dad recently, I think, right?
No, no, my dad's doing well.
Oh, shoot.
I'm struggling with I have the home care issues to deal with. I mean, this
Okay.
country's so screwed up. It's like if your reward, if you live long enough, is you're going to end up with nothing left in a nursing home until they're giving you morphine until you're gone.
Yeah, it's not a good arrangement here.
Yeah, my mom, it was weird with my mom because she was in and out of stuff for so long. I mean, it was like a couple of times they called in to for last rites.
Wow.
So it was more like over a period of 7 or 8 years. And then like Gil was saying too, it was just like a few weeks before she just didn't want to eat at all. I mean, that's kind of one of the signs and things. And yeah, it ended up being the last day she was really coherent was actually Mother's Day.
Hmm.
It was a week. It was the Monday after that, so that she passed and stuff. But yeah, it was kind of weird because I've kind of been going through a grieving process for on and off several times over those years. So it really was, by the time it actually happened, it was had kind of gotten to the point, kind of accepting of things. So
Mm-hmm.
It was kind of yeah, everything's different for everyone, of course, what the relationships you have and with people and how they're dealing with their lives. I mean, my mom was actually born in Chicago, but her mother took back to see her grandmother in Germany in 1939, and then they couldn't get out, so my mom was over
Oh,
there
wow.
during the war. When they found out at the end of the war that she was bilingual, they had a 15-year-old Catholic girl translating for some of the military stuff going on. So, I mean, it was just, yeah, I mean, we didn't know to call it PTSD then, but yeah, it's just.
Wow, that's a bad twist of fate back then. Thanks, Carl. Doug, I have an instinct that you've considered collective grief in some ways that you might want to talk about. This is just me thinking about you and your orbits. So
yeah, I mean, I've personally, we had a lot of loss over the last 2-3 years. My wife's grandmother died at 103, and she was cooking right up to the end. And my father-in-law passed within the last year, and he was diagnosed and sort of like had sort of this mix of dementia and kidney failure. And he was like, why would I want to do dialysis?
you had to talk him into it every time.
And then have my mind go, And here the family's stuck with my body being kept alive artificially. And
Wow.
he was sort of like, I think I'll skip the dialysis and just let the convergence of the dimension. And so he was like very, very clear about being done. And then, he managed to be like the longest person, the longest hospice person, in the history of the state of Michigan. But we very much, like, we organized our life to be in service to him, to my mother and father-in-law. They had gotten to a place where they clearly needed the help. We had empty nest, and then we had a house fire back east, and we were sort of like, where do we go? And the pull was to be with them. And we literally set it up so that we got their house sold and found a, Coen Brothers movie, manufactured home thing where we could be in one house and right across the street they could be. So they're living independently, but we're 30 seconds away. So like as the need curve and as the emergency calls and the things happen, we could serve. And I think it's an orientation to family and to, caring for that gets lost, in the world we're living in. And it's like, how many people in nursing home stages and assisted living contexts and whatever, where my parents were, my parents had a taste of that. Cheryl's parents have had tastes of that. There's a friend from back east who passed, who I was primary caregiver. His sons were scattered and not interested. And I sort of was responsible for him through his life. So I've had a lot of sort of firsthand experience with caring for people in, terminal trajectories. And I think the biggest shift occurred between the time my father died and my mother died. And when my father died, I was still very much in the, fighting for every last breath, fighting for health, fighting for recovery from, that whole orientation of Western medicine. And in retrospect, his last month or two fulfilled his worst nightmare of what he experienced when his mother passed. And so by the time, within a couple of years later, my mother rolled around, I had a completely different orientation. And she had multiple conditions, was living at home, full possession of mental faculties, body was giving out, and sort of rotational hospital stays. And she had been assigned a hospice team. And there was a moment where I was on the phone with her and I could hear sort of this just fear/desperation. And I had a conversation with her and I said, look, can I share an alternative take on all this? And she was like, sure. And I said, so, I believe death is actually a state of being change. It's a phase change. It's not an ending. And that a person is transitioning, they're leaving their body behind. They're leaving the corporeal container they've been in for this round, but they go on. And where they go to, none of the afflictions, none of the pain, none of the discomfort of the body go with them. And on the other side are all the people that love them and they love that went before them. And, on to the next round. And that you're ultimately in control of this. When you decide you're done, when you decide you've just had enough of this, because her day was spending half a day trying to get to a clear breath from emphysema, and the other half taking meds, choking down meds, and there was nothing else. She didn't enjoy food. She couldn't watch TV. She couldn't do this. She couldn't do that. There wasn't any living left. It was all this fighting for last ounce of. And I said, bottom line, you've had a hospice team assigned. We have a phone number. When you decide you've had enough, you give us a call. We'll arrange for anybody you want to say goodbye to come by, and we'll activate that team. And they'll come in and they'll do what they do and make you comfortable. And you decide when you're ready. And I could hear this exhale. And she said, I appreciate that, thanks. And the next day, the phone rings. It says, I've been thinking about that. And I don't take pleasure in this. I don't like, nothing is a reason for why I'm continuing to fight. I'm done. And in contrast to my father, she went completely peacefully on her own terms, saw everybody she wanted to see, said goodbye to everybody, gave her people things she wanted to give them, and was made comfortable and passed gently into that good night on her own terms. And there was no fear, there was no desperation, there was none of the struggle. And I didn't lose her. Like in the place I'm living in, I still have her. She's actually all around me in terms of, art and things that I inherited from her, and values, and knowing things like, in the summer you wear khaki or light gray pants and blue blazers, and in the winter you wear dark gray slacks and blue blazers. And, all of the things, and everything French is basically the height of culture. Like that was the New York Jewish kid package. And she was a fashion designer. So she was all about that. And so all of that is still living. And I think there are two very human experiential things that, in a weird way, in the times we're living in, just like everything else has been subjected to strange distortion, grief and trauma have almost been fetishized. And huge business has been generated not around people experiencing that and then transcending it, but experiencing it and it becoming their story. And from an elemental standpoint, a natural world standpoint, they're both responses, very real responses, but they need not be full stops. They need not be arresting of moving on with life, moving on with what's next. And I think there are a lot of folks that are have almost, developed a vested interest in trauma and grieving as not things to be transcended and healed, but as things to become, held on to and, flames fanned. And I know that's sort of a weird oblique thing to stir into the pot, but it's a lot of coaching clients have landed in my lap with years of holding on to loss or holding on to trauma. And supported in that. And it's not the only choice. So I think I'm complete with that. Sorry for the length of that.
Thanks, Doug, and thanks for sharing the stories. Eric.
Yeah, thanks everybody for sharing here. In terms of Barry Quart's death, it was sudden and unexpected. We talked with him 3 days before, and then he's gone. And how do we process that? The best way we can. Fortunately, there were people who were able to have contact with his family, and we have that little bridge. But it's a person we've never met in person. Most of us never met physically in person, but had a relationship with online, and a deep relationship. And he taught a lot of things. He participated the best he could, and we understood his limitations as well as his brilliance. So we're each processing it in our own way and doing what we think is appropriate. Memories, saving whatever we can. There will be a memorial service in Sam Hahn's group in August, I believe.
Can you, when you know the dates for that, can you let us know?
Yeah, Stacy, do you know?
Yeah, it's August 9th at 11 o'clock Eastern.
Okay, thank you.
I'll
Yeah.
get you I have to do that.
Yep. So, but Barry had his brain until the end. He was sharp. And I think that is the way to go, that rather than being sick and drawn out or unable to take care of your daily functional needs. And he had a good 80 years, which is decent for whatever we're meant to do on Earth in this lifetime. And I made some notes as I was thinking about all this, some other contrasts. In October 7th in Israel, there are videos that show families coping with horrors. And the one that touched me is a girl saying, "That was my sister," knowing that she's now dead. And that is seared into my memory, that when will the world realize the true impact of killing? The seriousness of it. Another thing, that there is a rotating memorial of T-shirts of teenagers killed by gun violence. It goes around to different churches, and a synagogue I belong to in Pennsylvania had it. And that's also chilling. On a walk this morning, I passed on corners where there were car accidents, people set up memorials, and this was, I think, probably a 19-year-old, and you see sneakers, skateboards, and artifacts of a life. people leaving candles and whatever, just to show some respect. Yeah, there are some movies like Bicentennial Man with Robin Williams, is a robot who decides after living 200 years and seeing the family he loves die that he wanted to die too. Yep. So, and I'm contrasting that with the Ted Danson series, The Good Place. So that model of heaven where it's a leaderboard. No, that's not what's good. People have imaginations, but we got to get down to reality. We're here for a short period of time. We're doing the best we can, and all we really have is our love for each other. So thank you.
Thanks, Eric. Klaus, please, then I'd like to add something to the conversation as well.
Because my camera not work.
Don't worry about your video. We see the Golden Gate Bridge or you, it's fine, but go ahead.
Yeah, maybe I'll turn the video off. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah, I do have a very mixed relationship with grief, because I was never able to really bond with my parents, and that was a very painful part of my life. So it created anger, but most of my parents came through World War II, and today we call it PTSD, but they were severely emotionally damaged during this time. So I really was trying to force a relationship with my dad to where we recognized each other, and it never worked. And he passed away when he was 74 years old. But he never got over World War II and all this craziness with being a Nazi and believing in this even to the end. And actually, this whole group of men in that age never really got over these crazy ideas that they were hanging on to. When my mother was married to her first husband, was a Gauleiter responsible for the Hitler Youth of a large region, was a colonel. And my mother, of course, with him, she was also actively working. They met at some work, and she ended up having to go to a denazification camp after the war for 9 months. He volunteered in the end to go to the front and ended up getting killed. But yeah, so when I went back to Germany, against all expectations, I got a job in Düsseldorf, which was about 2 hours away from my hometown. My mom made it to 97, age 97, and I spent quite a bit of time bringing her to our home in Düsseldorf, and that just didn't work out because she just could not connect. I mean, she was emotionally so gone. So then I visited her by myself, and I would take her around, and I would treat her, go to a nice restaurant, and she would love to dress up, and then she would dwell. She was back in the 1930s when she was married to this colonel, and they would be in a chauffeur-driven car and sit in the best places in the theater. You know, so she would relive that era, and it was just really hard to love her, you know. So anyway, she messed up my sister in a way that was just heartbreaking, and I ended up putting her into elevated care and paid for it, but we left after 5 years, and I just had to close that window. And you really never know what you missed. You know, my wife deeply loves her mom, and I'm just devoid of those emotions. That's really sad. So
Wallace, I just want to honor how hard you tried to love your parents and connect with your parents. Thank you for sharing that story. It's like you tried everything. You tried everything. Thank you.
thanks. Yeah.
I wanted to put a couple things in the conversation, but I think at this point, let's just take a little moment of silence. I'll bring us back out in a bit. Let's just sit and process what everybody's shared so far. Um, Earlier, Eric brought up Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's 5 stages of grief. And it turns out that a writer named David Kessler had worked a bit with Kubler-Ross before she died, and then with the family's approval, added a 6th one, which is finding meaning. At the beginning of the pandemic, Kessler started a grief circle online. I'm forgetting if it was on LinkedIn or Facebook. It was in a group on one of the platforms. And it got hugely popular, just hugely popular, because we were trying to process grief in the pandemic. People lost people. We had lost our lifestyles, our lives. We didn't know what was going on, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I've not heard from or of him since then, since like mid-pandemic, somewhere in there. But I was impressed at what a pressure relief valve having a space to talk about grief was for a lot of people. It was really important. And I can sense also that anyone hosting a space like that might feel trapped by the conversation or trapped by the topic because it's so important that you don't know that you can walk away, but sometimes it must be so heavy that you don't know that you can stay. And I wish we had more spaces like that as a matter of course in our society, places we could go. There's a lot of things I wish our society supported and had kind of organically that we don't. I think a lot about how it would be really nice if kids found kind of mirrors or sages that they could talk to through their lives as they learn stuff, people who weren't necessarily their parents, but who could like reflect back to them what they thought they heard and offer them connections to things they were curious about, whatever else it might be. I think that would really help stabilize and children and help them learn a lot and so forth. So finding meaning is really interesting. As a 6th stage, like finding meaning in the passing and the thing that you're grieving about it. I think it's a lovely addition. Stacy, please.
Yeah, thank you. So I really resonated with everything that Doug said. I kind of want to point out that there are people I know that would have been offended by that. And then there are people that would have loved it. I've had the experience where people at the end of their life, they want to talk to me and they tell me it's because I'm not telling them how they should feel. It's giving them a space to speak. And so Barry Court, Eric, I don't know if you know this, um, he told me that he was biologically unable to cry tears for sadness. And to be honest, there were times where I was like, I think he's just avoiding that. Doug might have better thoughts on that. But then when I let my imagination go a little bit, what he used to do, so he could cry from joy and from things like that. So it wasn't that he couldn't cry, but he used to therapize himself by writing parodies. So anytime something made him really upset, he wrote a story about it. You know, very funny stories, actually, very creative. But it made me think, because I think so much about words, that maybe there was some sort of magic in releasing whatever it was inside that most people might cry out. Maybe he was actually energetically shifting that into words. Um, and then, of course, we do it verbally. When my father died, it was a 6 week journey because it was kind of unexpected until those 6 weeks. And I always say that was like a spiritual turning point in my life. It really, really was. And it continued after he died. And so most of that, I was his proxy. I had to make the decisions, all of that. I was very in tune with him when he was conscious and not conscious. When it came time to sit Shiva, I mostly stayed in I honored myself. I was like, you know, but one of his friends from many, many years ago, somehow we connected and he came over. And I remember sitting on the floor. I mean, I knew him from when I was a little girl. He took me to S&H Green Stamps to use so I could buy a desk. And he sat, I just see myself sitting on the floor, this 50 some, I don't remember how old I was, and listening to him tell stories about my dad. And it just felt so good being there. I mean, it genuinely felt good. Now, I also had those 6 weeks to process it because like I said, it was more of a spiritual kind of thing. There was no praying that he got better. It was just, spirit walk with me type of thing. So what do I most want to say? Oh, well, with Barry, interestingly enough, because my relationship with him was online and I literally have hundreds of hours of recording, when I put up a recording and I'm listening to a conversation with me and him, it's really not much different. His whole essence is still there. Even with my father, because he lived in Florida, I recognized that it was easier for me. Marley was probably the hardest instance of grief that I had to go through. And for that, I set up rituals because I'm not really a ritual person. Every morning I touched his paw print, but what I learned most about grief, because I do think it's that transition period. So for me, I think it's a point at which energy needs to be like shifted maybe or recalibrated, or I don't know, something, there's a process in it. When you said grief, and I'm always looking for a word to go with it, first thing that came to me was good grief. And when you started Dearly Beloved, I heard Prince singing in the background.
I like that.
So, which brings me full circle to meaning, because especially with, well, not so much with my father, because I wasn't in that place yet. But with Stuart, who I wasn't as close to, but it was a learning kind of thing. And then with, well, actually, Marley first. Marley was a lot of learning and processing of deep emotions where I learned different techniques to help me. So, Eric, when you talk about pictures, pictures were hugely valuable, and especially the story that went behind every picture. And so it was the words and the tears combined. Because, you know, a spiritual teacher once taught me, when you cry, you help heal the world. And I really believe that. I see that water element, Doug, just like moving things along. But the meaning part. So all three of those deaths, Marley, Stewart, Barry, each time motivated me to do more work, kind of thing, and to find the meaning. And so I guess I'll just end by saying the importance of being able to speak our pain and to have it heard. I just think that's so hugely valuable in our own way, in our own way. But that's space for that. And it doesn't all have to be sad. There can be a lot of joy. I mean, it sounds like when Gil was talking about Joanna Macy's wake, I get the sense that there was some joy for her life and for the connectedness. And last thing I'm going to say, because it just came to mind, Carl, you posted something and it was about the moon and different songs. And I sent you back a song, which is Talking to the Moon. And the reason I bring that up is I've been thinking about like communications. And because of Barry, I'm getting back to trying to put everything in mathematical terms. So, like, stage one is the way you would talk to your friends and family. Stage two might be the way you're talking to the larger community. But stage three is like that, the same way I would talk to the moon or spirit or someone who passed. It then goes back around to friends and family. Like it's a continuous flow. And so I think what's more important than anything is to remember that nothing what is it? Energy cannot be destroyed or created. And to just remember that it's just a different part along the cycle. And it changes things. I mean, I know when I felt differently how I process death compared to how I process it now. And there's so much more richness and meaning behind how I do it now. And yeah, thank you for listening.
Thanks, Stacey. Um, Doug, at the very end of what you were saying, you dropped a little fish on the table, which I'd love to explore a little bit. And you started by saying, have we fetishized? Oh, I don't know why it thinks I'm doing a celebration. Have we fetishized grief and trauma? And that opens up a conversation. I was thinking about having an OGM call on a neighboring topic, and I'll maybe explain my way to this. There's stuff now called trauma-informed care, trauma-informed design. There are a bunch of people who have said, oh, wow, there's a whole lot of trauma in the world. We're not taking it into account. So let's do something about it. And I like a lot of those things. I've been trying to do internal family systems therapy, which very much is a way of dealing with, trauma, dealing with the way your mind deals with trauma, for example, and sorting your way through that. And it's very possible that we overdo that we step way out of bounds and start to like, well, okay, so everybody's got trauma, so you have new formed legal defenses. It's like the old insanity defense way back when. People went crazy with that. Maybe literally. I don't know. That's a little too bad a pun. But the neighboring topic that I'm interested in is wokeism and wokeness, and how. If you all are interested, I'll make this an OGM call topic. We are not well represented diverse-wise, but I'm really interested in what I think it's a reasonable conclusion that the ways our culture tried to go about wokeness and DEI and all that kind of stuff did not work, and did not work so badly that they caused enormous backlash. I don't know that there's general agreement, but I think in this room we would agree that the causes of wokeness, the sort of the urspring of those movements is genuine, horrible things that have happened to people who wound up in society at a horrible starting point with ongoing systemic issues that are really hard to fight. And so the fight was to sort of try to level the ground there. There's an entire conversation to be had about that, but I'm really interested in the positive questions on both sides of what I just described. For grief and trauma, what is the best and appropriate way to fold it into the conversation so that we don't just dismiss it and ignore it? Because there is a whole mess of trauma out there, and we don't want to fetishize it or take it to an extreme. But we don't. I think we suffer a lot if we exclude it and say, "Oh, we're just going to dismiss that and set it aside." Similarly, for wokeness, I'll just use that as a placeholder. What are the actual productive best ways to acknowledge that things have happened and to make them better over time? I don't know if y'all are interested. I'm interested in making that a whole topic. I don't know where that resonates for you. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Anybody?
I'll say something.
Please, Stacy.
Just briefly, I want to say that I think part of the challenge is, as a society, we have a tendency to only want to look at what's pretty and nice and not want to look at what's not so nice about ourselves. So I'm saying as a society, but I mean as individuals within a society, many of us tend to not want to look at what's not pretty. And I think that's a big part of the problem.
And along with that are people being blamed really don't want to be blamed, especially if they directly didn't cause it, if it was ancestors, et cetera, that causes problems. And this dynamic becomes a very easy to grab thing in moments where you're trying to provoke political change. And I think that's a big piece of the dynamic we just saw play out in 2016 and 2024 was hey, this has gone way overboard. It's not working. Just let's go back to this better ideal world we had way back when, like the Make America Great Again motto is exactly that. It encapsulates the dynamic I'm talking about just perfectly. And I'll go to Carl, but I also don't want to hijack. We've been having a lovely sit down about grief and sharing our grief stories, and I don't mean to hijack the conversation there. I just wanted to say I'm interested in this angle of it as well. So, Carl?
Yeah, along those points, I mean, I get so frustrated with like the 350 org people too. I mean, it's very similar to what you're talking about. I mean, it's like you're feeding the frame, you're feeding the frame of the deniers because who wants to accept responsibility? And at this point, who cares why we're in this condition? It's about the science and what corrective actions can we be taking now. That gets completely lost in all the stuff we're dealing with there. And then tying back to Stacy and stuff too, when I had done a search, Chris Cornell, singer, he was 5 years, it was his 5th birthday when Neil Armstrong was on the thing. So there's a lot of stuff you can find out there about how it impacted his life. But even the week before, I think I had kind of brought that up. It's like the first traumatic thing that you remember. Are there things that you associate with certain dates? I mean, for me, I wasn't even quite 4 yet, but it was RFK's assassination is what kind of the first thing, and all the family and everybody around type of thing. But I did post a link. He actually had a song, Worried Moon. But I started glancing at it, but it was like, I got to wait till after I get through my workshops and stuff before I wanted to really even listen to it and give it the space it deserves. But he had a song, Worried Moon.
And thanks for sharing that in the chat, Carl. I had not heard the song or about Chris Cornell. Other thoughts?
Just real quickly, I wanted to say to be careful about going into that get over it already space, because that's a big part of the problem too. You have to allow for the expression before you say, okay, now get over it. And actually, that's what makes things worse, in my opinion.
Totally agree. Totally agree. And when to understand when any of these emotions have played out or have been satisfied or whatever the right word is really difficult and will be used in different ways by different people involved. So oof, it's hard.
What,
Other thoughts? Go ahead, Gil.
yeah, why would we think, sorry, I put camera on. Why would we think that emotions need to be played out?
I'm using language poorly there.
No, but I'm not pointing at you. This is, I think, a cultural thing, and it's a curious one because they shift over time. I was remembering earlier on a friend of mine, Alyssa, who was killed in a freak motorcycle accident decades ago. Suddenly, like vibrant, healthy person, and I remember over many months, I got over it, right, in the first week or so. I mean, settled in, had great grief, accepted, moved on. And then, months later, I'd just be like, I remember like walking through my kitchen and feeling like I walked into a wall, just suddenly realizing that she's not here. Like I got over it and didn't get over it. And so, the notion that we get over it is a version maybe of the denial that Kubler-Ross talks about. And I put in the chat some excerpts from the New York Times obit on Joanna Macy, which is actually I thought, very nicely done and brought forward some of her thinking and doing and presence in the world. It very much speaks to this stuff. Not, getting over it and getting through it to something else, but the grief doesn't necessarily go away. It transforms.
I totally agree. And I'm just thinking maybe the phrasing better is rather than get over it, which I don't know that I meant to imply.
Yeah.
I just meant space to express it.
Yeah.
And to be heard. And as Stacy said earlier, to be heard without judgment in many cases.
Yeah.
Sometimes you just need to know that this thing came out of your mouth and landed on another human and was okay. And now it's going to change you. It's going to change whatever. But when we clamp that down, my maternal grandparents failed to tell me any stories about how they got out of Germany and blah blah blah. There's a whole lot of stories. They wanted me to have a happy life and a happy childhood, right? And they skipped a pretty big responsibility to tell me the hard parts of their lives, which I've been doing detective work to try to figure out on my own. And I totally get why. They didn't want to make me sad. When I was 9 or 10, my first dog was a Dalmatian named Fleck, which is Spot in German. I think that's a great name for a Dalmatian. And Fleck at some point hadn't been spayed, got pregnant, and all of a sudden Fleck was missing. And a couple weeks later, I was like, where's Fleck? And they're like, oh, we're sorry. She at the vet, they sort of finally operated, and they found out that the puppies had died and Fleck died. So we're sorry. We didn't have a ceremony. We didn't have a burial. We didn't talk about nothing. And I think my parents weren't good at coping with grief themselves, and certainly passed that on to me. Because it would have been nice that was the first major loss in my life, and until later when my grandmother passed away, which was really traumatic for me. Anyway, we have managed to make ourselves a happy life, the way Stacy said a moment ago. We like happy stuff, and we've managed to wall off or ignore, paint over, or sideline grief to the extent that I think it's hurting us.
Jerry, I've got something to throw into the conversation, but it's not. It's more sort of like technical part of grief
Go for it.
rather than is emotional side of it. Are you okay for me to go and discuss that?
Please proceed.
I've got a very good friend of mine, and he grew up in India. He was born in India, whatever. This is going back the tsunami of Indonesia in, when was it? When 360,000 people died. And also a lot of people from Sri Lanka died. And he was telling me about his best friend who was from Sri Lanka. And he said, so that was a few days after it happened. And he said, that guy told him that his whole family, like generations of it, had disappeared. Literally, they all died. And they only survived by running up the top of the palm tree, climbing up the top of the palm tree. But what he then said to me is, you white people would never be able to cope with that. Your whole family disappearing. You're not used to losing people. And it always sort of stayed with me. I have no opinion on that. Perhaps other people might. But it's like how we view grief or the emotional attachment is different depending on how dangerous our environment is and how much loss we experience. Anyway, it's just a discussion point. I haven't got a view of that really. But I just remembered him telling me that, and I know I couldn't cope. I mean, I know that, but he seemed to have another idea. And I think the coping is nothing to do with white versus non-white or whatever, Western versus non-West. I think the person is what makes a difference. But what is that makes a difference?
Stacey.
I think that's where meaning might have a big impact. I remember listening to this woman who's, I believe her ex-husband killed her 2 children. I can't imagine more grief than that. But it was what she did with it. And so I kind of get the sense that plays a role in what you can handle and what you can't. And I don't know, I do think it's individual, and I don't know what the secret is, but I do think they're correlated.
Anyone else with thoughts on this?
I'd like to share a couple of experiences I've had about grief rituals with other people. My first experience of grief was the summer of 1966 when, as I usually did, I went off to spend the summer with relatives, except I kissed my mother goodbye, not knowing that I'd never see her again. And I was never told that she was sick. And that was a really tough thing. That left me with a lot of grief for a lot of years, and I didn't know how to express it, and it really was weighing heavily on me. And then my dad dying, he was in very rough shape and had to put him in a nursing home, and went to visit him. He looked at me and said, "You fucking bastard, you put me here to die," which was true. I couldn't take care of him anymore, but it was a it was a very heavy thing. And I also did not know how to process my father's death. And then I moved to California in my early 30s, and I started to get involved with Joanna Macy. And I did this amazing experience with her called the Cairn of Mourning. So there's about 80 of us, and we're up at the place called Chinoa in the Redwoods of Mendocino. And she said, go off into a beautiful old Boy Scout camp. She says, go off on your own, spend an hour, find something in the world that you care about and contemplate it, and then find a rock and come back here. So we all did, and one at a time we stood up and we held a rock and we said, this rock represents whatever it is, deer, trees, whatever is being lost and destroyed through this extractive economy. And we placed it in the middle of the circle. And then she said, okay, we're all in this circle of witnessing. Now the next circle in, just out around just next to the perimeter, is the circle of reporting. So if you have something on your mind, stand up and walk in a circle and call it out. And those of us who are listening, our response will be, we hear you. And so people are walking around, they're saying, every 5 minutes, an area the size of a football field, this is in the 90s, disappears from the rainforest. And people say, we hear you. And a woman said, every 15 minutes, a man rapes a woman in this country. We hear you. And all of this heavy factual information that people are carrying that they read in the news, and it's finally being expressed, people saying, we hear you. And the next circle in is a circle of emotions. And that's where you move from reporting, you start saying, I'm fucking angry. I'm so goddamn mad at what's happening, And again, we hear you. People saying, we hear you. And the next circle in, next to the stones, is the circle of surrender. And people are going in and putting their hands on the stones, and they're just weeping, and they're crying and uncontrollably. And within an hour, every single one of us is weeping, except you're told, if you can't, like your friend Barry, if you can't access the tears yourself, go and rest your hand on someone's back and feel their tears. And that generally works to bring it out for yourself. And we're just laying there, a puddle of snot and tears and heaving sobs. And after a while, it all subsides and gets quiet. And it's like you're exhausted after a workout, just can barely move. And someone makes a comment and someone else makes a joke, and everybody erupts in laughter. And Joanna says, this happens every time. When you allow the grief and the despair to move through you, you come out the other side and there's this cosmic giggle. And it was the first time I experienced a lightening of the grief I had carried for so long. I also did grief rituals with Malidoma Somé, who was a West African medicine man from Burkina Faso, where it was for the Day of the Dead. And everybody brought pictures of their ancestors. And we were invited to go and sit and have lunch with them quietly, just, talk to them alone, our pictures. And so I said a lot of things to my dad and my mom that, I had held back on. And then there's this ritual where there's an altar at one end of the room with all of our ancestors, and an altar at the other end of the room that is just beautiful. It's got flowers and stones, and there's drumming, and you're invited to just go down to the altar if you're moved to, and say goodbye or say whatever you need to say. And once again, people are down there and they're crying. And if you can't access your tears yourself, you can go down and stand next to somebody. It's very similar in some ways to the grief ritual of Joanna. And in both of those instances, or I should say I've done them several times, there is a tremendous easing of the burden of grief. And I think it's a way that is so needed in this world, because people hold their grief to themselves. I don't know how, especially men, I don't know how many times I have been in circles with men where as soon as tears appear, they go, I'm sorry. Don't look at me, I'm crying. Like, as if we're ashamed of our grief. One of the first books I was assigned to read in my coaching course after my media fast was Ernst Becker's The Denial of Death, which I highly recommend. This culture, this country, Western world in general, we do not want to look at death. And there's a huge industry around it, but there's tremendous power in looking at death and allowing death to touch you. Death is always right there. Another ritual I did, another process I did with Joanna Macy was meeting your death. So we're all standing around this big circle, and she says, find someone you'd like to work with. And I see this beautiful woman, and I go over to her and say, hey, work together? Yeah, right. And then she says, okay, that's your death. I'm like, oh shit, And we're in this big field. She says, okay, now just start to walk around the field in a random walk and do everything you can to avoid making eye contact with your death until you finally do. And it will happen sooner or later. And then when you make eye contact with your death, go over and stand next to them and sit down and look in each other's eyes for a while, and then talk about what it's like to meet your death. And it was a marvelous thing. It was just like, it took so much fear away. Wow, death is a beautiful woman. She's kind, you know, she's caring. And we embraced, it was just this amazing exchange of this release of fear, this release of grief, of death is not that bad. And so these kinds of rituals, and I'm so grateful to Joanna for her work that reconnects, because these are the sorts of rituals that people are moving out into the world and inviting people to partake in, because they're so needed. You know, we just there's so much grief bound up, and it amounts, as Jerry was saying, to trauma. You know, we're traumatized by our lack of expression of grief, or by holding our grief to ourselves and not being ashamed to let people see it. So when you see someone in grief, witness them, you know, respectfully. Don't try to make it better. This is another big thing. Got to make it better. I had a dear friend who had an operation, and they opened him up. It was his third time having cancer. They said, "Oh, we can't do anything." They closed him up, but they gave him some bad blood and a transfusion. He was in a coma for a month, and I went to visit him in the surgical rehab. He was 80 at the time, and he looked at me and he said, "Thank God you're here. I'm thinking about giving up the ghost." And I knew that I was the only person in his life he could say that to. We're in a dream group together, and he was a very special man, and his family didn't want to, you know, "Oh, Dad, you're going to get better." No, he was not. And he's like, "I'm ready to go." And I said, "Okay, if you want to talk about that, I'm here. Let's talk about that. You know, giving up the ghost. Let's look at your life. Let's look what you've accomplished. You know, you got 2 beautiful children. You've had a great career." And he was so grateful to have someone with whom he could share his grief at the end of his life. So you can do a great mitzvah, a great service, by just sitting with people who are dying and not trying to fix them, not trying to make them better. Just listen to their stories, you know, love them, appreciate them, and know that that's going to be you one day, if you're lucky. So those are a few things on my mind about grief. And I haven't even touched on the larger grief of what's going on the planet, the loss of all the species and whatnot, which is a whole nother level that I find very difficult to handle and very present with me these days. Thanks for listening.
We hear you. Stacy.
What Ken just shared, and thank you for all that, it also reminded me of the connection to fear. So for the person leaving, it's not so much grief as it is the fear of what's going to come. But I noticed that there's a fear of tears. So I'm a sensitive person, surprise, surprise. And I was born that way, but I was told, you know, like I was like bullied into not crying, you know, the school of, you know, you want to cry, I'll give you something to cry about. So I always had to, you know, pretend that I wasn't sensitive. That being said, as I went through, you know, inner growth and working and whatever, I recognized that people don't like seeing other people cry, but that has more to do with them. So I had a father-in-law who was a real bully. And one day he said something that really hurt me. And this time I just cried in front of him. That man melted to mush. I got phone calls for the rest of the night from my in-laws of how sorry they were. I don't feel bad about it. He deserved it. But I'm just saying that your own personal tears, like some people are afraid of them, I guess is what I'm trying to say. So there's some sort of shifting, I think, that needs to be done over there. You know, like, yeah, I'll stop there because it plays out in a lot of ways.
Stacey, you reminded me something about tears. You know, I read a lot, I always have, and unfortunately, I don't have Jerry's external brain to remember where things I read appeared, and I've never been able to find this since, but I read something in my 20s about tears, and there's a certain kind of tears that come with grief that are there as a lubricant to keep things from ripping you apart.
Oh,
And I just love that, that tears are when things that wouldn't ordinarily rip you apart, if you allow the tears to flow, you will get ripped but not apart, or maybe you'll get ripped open, so that something
bleed
else
down.
can come in,
Yeah, like that.
Thank you. Go
I
ahead, Jim.
teach, I know we're at the end, but I teach a workshop, and the first half of it is just enabling people to reconnect and get reacquainted with their own feelings, and get clarity of which feeling they're having when, and what it feels like, what it looks like, what the experiential is. And one of the things that when I was training to teach this, that I learned very early on, is when you put your hand, when Ken described, put your hand on somebody's shoulder, and when you see people try to comfort other people and they put their arms around them and they start patting them, and doing that actually shuts off their feelings. It shuts them down. It's a distraction. It's actually a projective act. But when you just place your hand, no movement, it establishes connection, and it provides healing and comfort, as presencing and witnessing to. And it's a really subtle difference, but it's a Grand Canyon size difference. And in the culture of this world, that level of discernment doesn't exist. And most people just don't know. They don't know their own feelings. They don't know how to recognize somebody else's feelings. They don't know how to read it. If they do recognize it's happening, what it is, like, what is that person experiencing? I mean, we're not that far out of the cave. we're learning. We're doing better as a species, but we're not that far out of the cave. And to the attention to trauma, attention to grieving, there's also a backing up to how do we reduce the instances that cause trauma, that cause fear and hurt in the way we do us and the way we relate to each other as a species. And the trauma and grieving, to a certain extent, is the rearview mirror, and projecting into a future that doesn't exist is sort of meaningless. But in the moment, for me, how can I do better? And the best possibility is not to add any more trauma to the trauma that we've already generated globally and as a species. How do we stop adding to the pile?
And just to add a wrong twist to the end of this call, before I'm hoping Ken has a poem for us, Darvo is a common strategy that the president of the United States uses all the time, which is basically deny the thing that happened and then reverse victim and offender. And it is the reinfliction of trauma. on the person who was traumatized. It's astonishing. And I hate that it's been working so well. And I'm really interested in discovering the antidote. Sir Ken,
I believe
hast thou?
I believe the antidote is connection.
Yeah, me too. Me too.
Because that's reinforcing a separation. And I think once you get down to the connection, that all disappears. I do have a poem. This is one I wrote last week. It's my own little expression of some grief. It's called Purgatory. We're moving, which means downsizing. Old boxes need to be gone through. For days, I have been sorting, sifting, shifting, discarding, releasing, saving. I find a working Walkman and listen to cassette tapes with the voices of loved ones who've been dead for decades. My heart catches at the sounds. How lovely, how comforting to hear once more the voices of those who were adults in my life when I was a child. To hear their humor and their joy, to feel, still palpable, across the years, the love they had for me. My heart swells. A sweet grief catches me unawares. The water pours from my eyes and my voice catches in my throat as I ask myself the age-old old age question. How did the time go by so fast?
Ken, that was truly beautiful.
Really
Thank you.
beautiful. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
I really love that. Can't say that enough.
Yeah. Do you mind reading it to us again?
Sure. Purgatory. We're moving, which means downsizing. Old boxes need to be gone through. For days, I have been sorting, shifting, sifting, discarding, releasing, saving. I find a working Walkman and listen to cassette tapes with the voices of loved ones who've been dead for decades. My heart catches at the sounds. How lovely, how comforting to hear once more the voices of those who were adults in my life when I was a child. To hear their humor and their joy, to feel, still palpable across the years, the love they had for me. My heart swells. A sweet grief catches me unawares. The water pours from my eyes. My voice catches in my throat as I ask myself the age-old old age question. How did the time go by so fast?
Thank you, Ken. I'm hoping, as usual, you'll post that to the OGM list.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And that's another way of processing grief, is giving it voice. And, so thanks for,
Seems to work.
thanks for everything.
Seems to work. Thank you. Thank you all. Thank you all for the love and warmth with which you've all shown up and told your stories and jumped into the conversation. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Jerry, for inviting the topic.
And we didn't mention Gen AI once.
Until
You just did.
I just had to do that. I just had to do that. Sorry. All right, let's be careful out there.
One last thing, I saw Pete F's camera come on real briefly. I wasn't sure if he had wanted to say anything or.
I don't know. I've been watching just his name on the slide. I think we're good. Pete, do you want to say anything?
And yeah, no, nothing to say. Thank you.
Thanks for being here. Thanks, y'all.
Bye.
Ciao.
Ciao.